They say peace and quiet is what you move out to the country for. Wide open fields, early mornings, and no one telling you what color your mailbox should be. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the chaos follows. Not with sirens or flashing lights, but with lawn committees, pastel blazers, and people who think HOA president means emperor of the dirt you stand on. My name's Ethan Cole. I bought this land to escape the noise, built a life with my own two hands, grew food, raised dogs, kept to myself. And then she showed up. Deborah Langston, queen of the subdivision. And from the moment she stepped onto my land without asking, I knew peace and quiet were about to get real complicated. Ethan Cole hadn't come to Little Hollow to make friends. He came for the quiet. After 22 years battling fires in Portland, both literal and political, he was done with noise, traffic, backstabbing lieutenants, and city council red tape. What he wanted was exactly what he'd inherited: a 12-acre patch of earth with rolling apple orchards, a weathered red barn, and silence so complete you could hear a crow flap its wings from half a mile away. Every morning, just before 6, Ethan poured his coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and sat in the same creaky wooden chair his father used to rock him in. Moose, his old hound, always flopped at his feet, tail thumping once or twice before falling still. Together, they'd watch the sun creep over the trees like it had nowhere else to be. Life had a rhythm now. A slow, purposeful kind of rhythm Ethan hadn't realized he craved until he felt it in his bones. Chopping firewood, tending the vines, bottling cider from his own apples. There were no meetings, no phone calls, just seasons, growth, rain, and the unspoken agreement between man and land. I'll take care of you, you take care of me. So when the HOA flyers started showing up in his mailbox, slick paper, big fonts, phrases like reinvigorating our community identity and vision for shared spaces, he didn't think much of them. New folks had been moving in over the past year, mostly retirees from California or Seattle, who wanted a little nature, but still DoorDash. They bought up the vacant homes along Orchard Crest Lane, half a mile from Ethan's property line. Cute, square subdivisions, identical shutters, HOA board included. Ethan ignored them. Why wouldn't he? His land wasn't part of the development, never had been. County records said it was agricultural property, zoned independently, and exempt from any neighborhood regulations. But Deborah Langston, newly elected HOA president, apparently didn't get the memo. The first time he met her was at the farmer's market. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a straw hat so wide it looked like it had its own zip code. She introduced herself with a gleaming smile and a handshake like a sales pitch. "You must be Mr. Cole," she said. "We've heard so much about your little homestead. Just adorable, like a postcard." Ethan simply nodded and returned to bagging his apples. Deborah hadn't taken the hint. "We're hoping to integrate more of the scenic value into our community lifestyle. You know, walking trails, wellness weekends, open-air yoga. Nature belongs to everyone, right?" Ethan looked at her then, not unkindly, but directly. "No, ma'am," he said. "Nature belongs to those who respect it, and this piece of it belongs to me." He thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The following week, someone painted over his private property sign with pastel green paint and hand-lettered "Community Access Encouraged" in flowery script. He found brochures for scenic walking tours of the Hollow stapled to his fence posts. And on Saturday morning, a group of well-dressed strangers walked through his orchard, like it was a public botanical garden, stopping to take selfies under his apple trees. That's when he knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a siege. Deborah and her HOA weren't just trying to borrow the aesthetic of his land. They were claiming it, not legally, not formally, but socially. And for people like Deborah, social optics were law enough. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just fixed his signs, deleted the flyers, and put a fresh lock on the gate. But then Sunday came, and with it, the brunch. It began just after 10 a.m. on Sunday. Ethan was tightening the hinges on the chicken coop when Moose gave a low, rumbling growl. The kind of sound that meant visitors, uninvited ones. Ethan straightened slowly, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked up. A caravan of cars was pulling onto the dirt road at the edge of his property. SUVs, a hybrid or two, all shiny, all out of place. He counted them. 6 vehicles, at least a dozen people. Stepping out in crisp white sneakers, pastel polo shirts, and wide-brimmed hats. One woman was already taking a panoramic video on her phone, walking backward into his field like it was a vineyard tour in Napa. Moose let out a sharper bark. "Easy, boy," Ethan muttered, but his hand found the handle of the shovel leaning by the coop. At the center of it all, emerging like the director of a poorly rehearsed play, was Deborah Langston. She wore a floral sundress and matching heels that sank a half-inch into the soil with each step. But she didn't seem to care. She was holding a clipboard. That alone told Ethan everything he needed to know. "Good morning, Ethan," she called as if they were old friends. "Isn't it just a perfect day for connection?" Ethan didn't move. "What the hell is this?" she laughed. Not cruelly. Not kindly. Just the way a person laughs when they've already decided they're right and you're being ridiculous. "We're hosting our first community wellness walkthrough," she said brightly. "A few of our residents expressed interest in nature immersion. And your farm, well, it's such a treasure. We thought it'd be the perfect place." He stared at her. "On my land?" "Oh, Ethan," she cooed, as if calming a child. "The HOA voted last month to classify your adjacent property as an open shared boundary zone. It's mostly symbolic, of course, but it gives us space to build community bridges." "I'm not in your HOA," he said, his voice flat. "No, but your land is within our scenic overlay district and—" "Deborah," he interrupted, stepping closer. "This isn't a park. It's not a backdrop. This is my home. And these people," he gestured at the crowd, now beginning to wander toward the orchard, "are trespassing." She blinked. "Let's not get caught up in semantics." Behind her, a man in cargo shorts was photographing himself beside the old barn. A young couple had set down a yoga mat in the clearing near the goat enclosure. Someone had opened a picnic basket on the edge of his strawberry patch. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You've got 30 seconds to turn around and leave." Her eyes narrowed just a flicker. "Ethan, I'm trying to make this place better, for everyone. And I'm trying to keep people from stepping on the irrigation lines I buried yesterday." As if on cue, there was a yelp from the orchard. I think I broke something," a voice called out. "Was this pipe supposed to be here?" Ethan didn't flinch. Deborah crossed her arms. "If you want to be difficult, that's your choice. But this hostility doesn't reflect well on you." Moose barked again, sharper this time, closer to a warning than a greeting. "I'm not being hostile," Ethan said. "But the next time someone sets foot past that post, I can't promise my dog will keep assuming they're friendly." She froze, just for a second. "I could call the sheriff," she said finally. "You could," he said. "But he'll remind you this is agricultural land with full private protection under county ordinance. You're welcome to look it up. Page 12, subsection 4. She pursed her lips. Then, with deliberate elegance, she turned away from him. "Let's relocate the brunch closer to the trailhead," she called over her shoulder. "It seems Ethan's feeling a little territorial." Laughter bubbled from her group like cheap champagne. But it was nervous laughter, the kind that fills silence when no one's quite sure who's actually in the right. As the pastel parade began to retreat, slowly, reluctantly, Ethan didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He waited until the last SUV disappeared around the bend, then walked to the gate, unscrewed the "Please respect our land" sign, and replaced it with a new one. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. And beneath it, in smaller letters, "Ask Moose." Ethan thought the new sign would be enough. He had added a second warning beneath it, something blunt, unambiguous. This land is not open for public use. Do not enter. No exceptions. But by Wednesday, he knew it wasn't over. It began with the drone. He was pruning the lower branches of an overgrown apple tree when he heard the soft, mosquito whine of rotors. At first, he thought it was a bird, or maybe one of the neighbor kids playing around. But when he looked up, there it was, a sleek black drone hovering directly above his barn. Its little camera gimbal pointed straight at him. Ethan didn't wave. He didn't throw a rock, he just stared. The drone hovered for another few seconds, then zipped back in the direction of the Orchard Crest subdivision, like it had found what it was looking for. By evening, Ethan received his answer. A crisp white envelope with the HOA seal had been taped to his front gate. No postage, just placed there like a threat. The letter was printed on heavy stock paper. Too fancy for a complaint, too thin for a lawsuit. It read, "Dear Mr. Cole, we are writing to inform you that the HOA has received multiple concerns regarding the presence of dangerous animals on or near shared access property lines. Several residents have reported feeling unsafe due to aggressive behavior exhibited by your dogs, Moose and Tiller. As per Section 5 of the Community Code of Conduct, all animals deemed a potential threat to neighborhood well-being must be removed or relocated immediately. Failure to comply may result in further action. Respectfully, Deborah Langston, HOA President, Orchard Crest." Ethan snorted and folded the letter in half, then in half again, then into the trash. He didn't think much of it until the white van showed up. 2 days later, just after breakfast, an animal control vehicle rolled up to the gate. A uniformed officer stepped out, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable beneath his ball cap. Ethan met him halfway down the gravel drive. "Morning," the officer said. "Name's Jim Raskin. Got a report about aggressive dogs on the property?" Ethan tilted his head. "That right." Jim glanced down at the clipboard. "Yeah, anonymous call. Said the dogs were threatening people. Almost attacked a resident during an outdoor community event." HOA president filed it. Ethan scratched the side of his neck and whistled. A beat later, Moose and Tiller came trotting out from behind the barn, tails wagging, ears perked, excited to meet the stranger. Tiller dropped a chewed pine cone at Jim's feet as a gift. Jim crouched, scratched both dogs behind the ears, and chuckled. "These are the monsters, huh?" "They've licked more faces than they've growled at," Ethan said. "And they don't leave the property unless I say so." Jim stood back up, sighing. "I figured. We get these HOA complaints now and then. Usually it's a control thing." "Deborah Langston," Ethan said flatly. Jim raised an eyebrow. "So you already knew?" Let's just say it's not her first appearance on my land." Jim made a few notes on the form, then nodded. "Look, no signs of aggression, no injuries, no video. I'm marking this unfounded, but I'll put a note on the file. If she keeps filing false claims, she could be the one in trouble." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Could I file something back?" "Sure. Start with a civil harassment report, especially if you've got evidence." That was all Ethan needed to hear. By sunset, he was in his small office above the barn, surrounded by printouts and security footage. He scrolled through camera feeds from the past 2 weeks. There they were, HOA members walking through his fields, children picking apples, Deborah herself organizing folding chairs like she was directing a parade. He cataloged it all: date, time, number of people, trespassing violations. He matched it with property law printouts he'd downloaded from the county website. He cross-referenced his land deed. He even found an old PDF copy of the HOA's own charter, which, ironically, explicitly stated that non-members have no authority over external property lines. By the time he was done, he had a 28-page document organized, tabbed, and ready to go. He didn't intend to file a lawsuit, not yet. But he printed 4 copies of the dossier. One went into a fireproof safe. One was dropped off, anonymously, at the HOA board's attorney's office. One was emailed to the county zoning commission, with a polite inquiry about whether HOA attempts to reclassify scenic land could be considered fraudulent. And the fourth? That one he printed on bright yellow paper and slid, carefully, strategically, into the community mailbox bulletin board, just beneath Deborah's monthly newsletter. By the weekend, Ethan had heard nothing, which told him everything. The town wasn't laughing, the board wasn't denying, and Deborah wasn't smiling. He knew it then. She had crossed the line. But now, she realized it. And that meant she'd either retreat or retaliate. And judging by the expensive SUV parked across the road from his orchard that night, Ethan guessed it would be the latter. For Ethan, the SUV across the road wasn't just an eyesore. It was a signal. One of those sleek, jet-black models with tinted windows and out-of-state plates that didn't belong in Little Hollow unless someone was either lost or watching. And Ethan didn't believe in coincidences. At first, he did what he always did, watched in silence. He noted when the vehicle arrived, 6:47 a.m., and when it left, 4:12 p.m. Always idle, never parked in anyone's driveway, just sitting quietly across the gravel road from his land, like a silent threat wrapped in chrome. Then he started noticing other signs. Someone had moved the no trespassing sign at the far end of his apple rows. Not broken or defaced, just rotated, so the words no longer faced the road. Someone had taken photographs of his irrigation lines. He found footprints near them, not his own, not deep enough to be a child's either. And one morning, just before dawn, he found a real estate flyer shoved under the windshield wiper of his truck. Little Hollow Ridge, coming soon. Sustainable living, luxury homes. Now pre-zoning for community development. Below that, a photo of a digital rendering that looked eerily similar to his farm, only with paved paths, patio fire pits, and people doing yoga in front of the barn. Ethan's stomach turned. It wasn't just brunch and boundaries anymore. Deborah was working with someone, and they wanted the land. He made one call. Catherine Vega. Catherine wasn't just the county's best real estate attorney. She was also the daughter of the late Juan Vega, a cattleman whose land had once been annexed under shady HOA dealings and sold to developers. Catherine had turned her father's loss into purpose. Ethan trusted her like he trusted few people. She showed up that afternoon in hiking boots and a leather portfolio, her voice calm, efficient. "What you've got here," she said, flipping through the flyers and complaint letters, "is a textbook setup for land repurposing through social pressure. They can't take your land legally, so they're trying to make it unbearable to live here." Ethan's face darkened. "How?" Catherine ticked off her fingers. 1. Fabricate nuisance complaints to make you look unreasonable. 2. Push local zoning conversations by introducing public need. You've seen the flyers. 3. Break you down socially until you either sell out or make a mistake big enough they can leverage. He grunted. "And the HOA's part of this?" "Deborah's the face," Catherine said. "But the money, that's coming from a developer." She slid a document across his table. Crestview Urban Solutions, LLC, based in Bend, Oregon. Quietly acquiring properties surrounding Little Hollow for 3 years. Last year, they acquired 3 parcels less than a mile from Ethan's northern border and listed under the community liaison contact, Deborah Langston. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling together like dominoes in his chest. The drone, the cars, the brunch, the endless boundary violations. None of it was about community. It was about leverage. "They're prepping for eminent domain pressure," Catherine continued. "If they get enough people to sign petitions claiming your land is disruptive to community planning, they can make a case to the county." "But I've got an agricultural exemption," Ethan said. "Zoned since 1952. They can't override that directly, no. But they can bury you in legal fees, bad faith inspections, nuisance suits, make you want to give up." Ethan's jaw clenched. "They picked the wrong farmer." Catherine smirked. "Good. Because you're going to need to fight smart. She laid out the plan. 1. Gather allies. Catherine knew at least 4 other residents frustrated with the HOA's recent overreach. 2 retired teachers, 1 war vet, and a single mom fined for her daughter's lemonade stand. 2. Compile undeniable evidence. Photos, timestamps, drone footage, zoning paperwork, witness statements. Ethan's cameras had already captured most of it. Catherine would turn it into a clean, bulletproof dossier. 3. Strategically leak the truth. Not on social media. Not yet. But through whispers, emails, and HOA channels. Enough to raise eyebrows. Get people questioning the intentions of their beloved president. 4. Call for a public meeting. Ethan would not speak first, but he would show up, with proof, with calm, and with the full legal weight of Catherine's office behind him. But you've got to hold, she warned him. They'll bait you again, make you look like the unreasonable one. I'm not looking for revenge, Ethan said. Just my land back. You're not going to get your land back, Catherine corrected, because you never lost it. You're going to remind them what happens when someone plants seeds where they don't own the soil. That night, Ethan stood by the fence, watching the sun dip low behind his orchard. Moose sat at his side, tail still, ears high. The wind was quiet, but his blood buzzed. Deborah had trespassed across the wrong line. She hadn't just violated his land. She'd violated his trust in the very idea of neighborliness. And now she was going to learn, slowly, carefully, and without a single raised voice, just how dangerous it could be to pick a fight with someone who had more patience than pride, and a lawyer who used to run cross-country track. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It had already started. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be routine, held at the Orchard Crest Community Center, a tidy beige brick building with motivational posters and folding chairs. It usually drew a small handful of residents, mostly there for snacks and mild grievances about lawn edging. But that night, the room was packed. Ethan didn't sit in the front row. He wasn't the type. Instead, he stood near the back, arms crossed, a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. Catherine stood beside him, crisp blazer, expression unreadable, a thick legal folder in her hands. The tension was electric. People whispered. Heads turned. Everyone knew something was up. The words, real estate, scam, and lawsuit had been drifting through the neighborhood like pollen all week. Up front, Deborah Langston looked radiant. That was the only word for it. Radiant. And rehearsed. She wore her signature butter yellow blazer, a silver brooch pinned to her lapel, and a saccharine smile fixed on her face like stage makeup. Her tone, as she opened the meeting, was honey smooth. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she cooed. "We're thrilled to see such enthusiastic community engagement. This is what neighborhood living is all about." Ethan could practically hear Catherine roll her eyes. Deborah continued with her agenda. Budget allocations, lawn compliance reminders, a brief, thinly veiled complaint about certain residents with aggressive animals. Ethan didn't flinch. But then came the line they were waiting for. "And finally," Deborah said, her voice rising in fake cheer, "we'd like to propose a resolution to begin preliminary discussions on a community development initiative in the eastern rural perimeter." She gestured vaguely, "which includes scenic pathways, shared green space, and potential low-impact housing extensions for future residents." The room murmured. Eastern rural perimeter. Everyone knew what that meant. Ethan's farm. That was the cue. Catherine stepped forward, calm and professional. "Excuse me, Madam Chair," she said smoothly. "Before the board proceeds with any vote, my client has a few materials he'd like to distribute for public awareness." Deborah's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, we didn't schedule any—" "We're exercising the right to petition the board," Catherine interrupted, "as outlined in Article 7, subsection 2 of your own HOA charter." Someone in the audience gasped. That part of the charter hadn't been mentioned in years. Deborah looked caught between indignation and panic. Very well, she said through clenched teeth. Make it brief. Catherine nodded to Ethan. He stepped forward. Not grandstanding, not dramatic, just measured, steady, like the land he stood on. He cleared his throat once and spoke, voice low and even. Most of you know me. I'm not part of your HOA, never have been. But over the last few months, someone has been trying to act like they control land they don't own. My land, he paused. I've been trespassed on, had my animals falsely reported, had strangers walking through my orchard like it was a theme park. And I kept quiet. Until I couldn't. Catherine stepped beside him, opening the folder and distributing copies of their dossier to every resident in the front rows. Within seconds, a wave of paper rustling filled the room. What you're looking at, Ethan continued, are records of property violations, surveillance footage of unauthorized group events, and real estate marketing materials showing my farm as part of a future eco-housing development. Deborah paled. Someone in the third row gasped. That's your barn. A man next to her squinted at the flyer. And that's your dog, Moose? Sure is, Ethan said. Ethan Baashamura. Which raises the question. Why is my private land being sold in fantasy brochures by a company I've never spoken to? Catherine held up a second set of documents. Crestview Urban Solutions, LLC, she said clearly. A developer working with a community liaison listed as Deborah Langston. Dead silence. Deborah opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's a complete mischaracterization. It's a matter of public record, Catherine snapped. You signed on as a consultant, took payment, then failed to disclose it during HOA votes. That's a conflict of interest, possibly criminal under civil codes related to community governance. The board members began to shift in their seats. We didn't know anything about this, one muttered. Another leaned toward Deborah, whispering angrily. I tried to warn you, Ethan said. I told you this isn't just land, it's livelihood. And you don't get to manipulate people into handing over what generations have built, because you think a walking path would be more scenic. Deborah stood, voice trembling now. You don't understand. I was doing what's best for the community. No, Ethan said sharply. You were doing what was best for your resume. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the room erupted into applause, not raucous, but righteous. A slow build of people who had felt the HOA squeeze for too long and were finally watching the dam crack. A woman in the second row stood. I move to censure President Langston for undisclosed conflicts of interest. A man followed. I second it. I move to suspend all board votes related to land development until legal review, another added. Ethan didn't say a word. He didn't need to. By the end of the meeting, Deborah had been temporarily removed from her role, pending legal inquiry. Catherine handed the full dossier to a county representative who had been in quiet attendance at the back. And Ethan? He walked out of the community center with Moose trotting beside him, head high, the cool night air humming with the quiet satisfaction of justice finally heard. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting. The autumn sun stretched low across Ethan's fields, casting golden light over rows of pumpkins and late-season beans. The air was crisp, but not cold, the kind of quiet warmth that settles into your bones when things finally feel right. The farm was still his, but more importantly, so was the peace. The county had launched an investigation into the HOA's misconduct. Catherine made sure the right pressure was applied. Deborah's consulting payments had been traced, emails had been subpoenaed, and several board members quietly stepped down to avoid deeper scrutiny. Deborah, once the self-crowned queen of Orchard Crest, now found herself walking through town with her head low. No more pastel luncheons, no more community enhancement speeches, just silence, and sideways glances from neighbors who now saw her for what she truly was. The HOA, under interim leadership, had paused all expansion plans indefinitely. At the first meeting after the shakeup, Ethan was invited, not as a guest, but as a contributor. We'd like to ask for your input. one board member had said awkwardly. Not just on land use policy, but maybe on how to get back to neighborliness. Ethan had given a small smile. He'd never wanted a seat at their table. But maybe it was time they all sat at a new one, together. That weekend, he organized the first real community gathering. On his terms. No flyers, no yoga mats, no unsolicited brunches. Just a big wooden table set up under the old walnut tree, where neighbors came together to share homemade food, stories, and laughter. Kids helped him feed the chickens. Teens painted signs for the new community garden he was helping to fund with the proceeds from a produce co-op he'd launched with Catherine's guidance. And for the first time, people saw the land not as property, but as a living space that fed them in more ways than one. One by one, the walls of suspicion began to fall. The vet who had been fined for his too-tall flagpole now brought him a crate of peaches. The single mom who'd fought off 3 bogus citations for her daughter's lemonade stand. She was now helping Ethan coordinate Saturday harvest tours for local schools. Even the retired librarian, who had once sided with Deborah on every vote, stood beside Ethan at the potluck table and said, "You were right to stand your ground." And then, one afternoon, Deborah returned. She stood just outside the gate, not stepping past it. Not anymore. Gone was the yellow blazer. Gone was the clipboard. She wore jeans and a plain gray sweater, and she looked older. Not in years, but in weight. The weight of someone who'd had power and lost it, and maybe, just maybe, understood why. Ethan saw her through the kitchen window. He stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel. They didn't speak at first. The breeze rustled between them like a curtain, offering the chance to turn away. Instead, Deborah cleared her throat. "I came to apologize," she said softly. "A real one this time." Ethan didn't nod, didn't frown, just listened. "I thought I knew what this place needed," she continued. "But really, I just didn't want to feel irrelevant. I was afraid of not mattering anymore." That part landed heavier than either of them expected. "You could have just asked to be included," Ethan said, "instead of trying to take it." "I see that now." She looked around, at the land she'd once tried to claim, the dog snoozing by the barn, the kids laughing in the distance as they painted pumpkins. "It's beautiful what you're building here," she said. "It's not just me." "Still," she said, voice catching just slightly, "I'd like to help, if that's ever something you'd consider." Ethan studied her for a moment. Not out of judgment, but caution. People don't change overnight. But they do change. Sometimes through defeat. Sometimes through watching others get back up after they tried to knock them down. "We'll see," he said, not unkindly. "Start with the garden committee. They could use an extra set of hands." A flicker of gratitude crossed her face. "Thank you." Ethan nodded once, then turned to go. Moose followed him back toward the fields, his tail wagging in slow, steady beats. As he walked, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not vindication, but belonging. Not to an HOA, not to a development, not to anything on paper, but to a place where people finally understood that community isn't something you force with rules and forms. It's something you grow. And sometimes you just need a little space, protected, respected, and fiercely defended, to let it bloom.